Factsverse presents the insane story of the 17-year-old sole survivor of a plane crash that killed 70 people. George Lamson Jr. grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota, and he was your typical teen from Minnesota. He was 17 years old in 1985 and a senior in high school. When he wasn't in school, he played hockey. He was a Boy Scout. He attended church. To make extra cash, he worked as a paperboy. He cut his neighbor's grass and he shoveled neighbors' sidewalks. He was even an altar boy during Sunday Mass. Well, George and his father had spent a weekend in January 1985, and they took a chartered plane along with a group of other Minnesotans. Some members of the group were traveling to Stamford, California to see the Super Bowl. George and his father were staying in nearby Lake Tahoe. George told his father that he loved it so much there that he was hoping to live in Reno someday. The day before the Super Bowl, George spent the day skiing at the Heavenly Mountain Resort near Lake Tahoe. He says that he felt in tune and connected to his surroundings that day, which made him want to live there when he got older. The flight back to Minneapolis was going to be a 5-hour flight that wasn't taking off until shortly after 1 p.m. They were boarding Galaxy Airlines Flight 203. There were 5 crew members and 65 passengers on board, including George and his father. Because the flight was taking off so late, the two were looking forward to getting some sleep during their flight home. About a minute after the plane took off, the co-pilot contacted the tower in Reno and asked the staff to allow them to return to the airport so that they could land. The co-pilot mentioned a massive vibration on the radio and then reduced the power to the plane's 4 engines to figure out what was causing the problem. Full power was never restored to the engines, which caused the wings to fall. A mile and a half away from the runway, the plane crashed. The plane crashed near a car dealership and a mini-golf course. The owner of the mini-golf course called emergency services as soon as he saw the plane coming down. When the plane hit, it pretty much disintegrated upon impact. It created a fireball and debris was spread across U.S. Highway 395 and nearby South Virginia Street. When the plane hit the ground, it broke in half right in front of the row where George and his father were sitting. When the plane crashed, George's seat was thrown through the plane. He was thrown right through a fireball, and according to the United States National Transportation Safety Board report, George was still in his seat and was thrown 40 feet. He says when he hit the pavement, he was unable to get up. He was knocked out a few seconds later, and he thought that he was dead. George Kitchen was the fire captain on the scene. He says that the first thing he saw was George, and he was still strapped into his seat on South Virginia Street. The fire captain and his team gave George first aid until the ambulance arrived. Amazingly, he suffered scratches and minor burns, but it was a miracle that he survived. George, his father, and another man named Robert Higgins also survived the crash. Sadly, though, in the days following the accident, George Sr. and Robert both died from their injuries. This made George Jr. the sole survivor of a crash that claimed 70 lives. After the crash, George went through many emotions that he didn't know how to handle. He didn't want to reach out to the family members of the victims because he felt guilty that he had survived while their loved ones had not. He fell into a deep depression. He dropped out of school and he didn't want to do anything. He received a cash settlement from the airline, which wasn't good for somebody going through such a dark time. He figured since he had money, he didn't have to worry about doing anything. One day George woke up and he thought about the promise that he'd made to his father, and he moved to Reno. There he met a girl. He fell in love, found a job. He finally started feeling like himself. After getting married, George and his wife had a baby girl, and he even reached out to the other sole survivors of plane crashes, and he found a great support system in those people. The insane story of a 17-year-old sole survivor of a plane crash that killed 70 people is also an inspirational story. Subscribe for more.